The procedure itself, both the initial exemption procedure and the appeal was very intimate, very invasive and personal. And it's interesting because there's a Supreme Court case called Syndicate Northcrest v. Amsterdam, where the court outlines the test for determining whether a law or a policy is infringement of someone's religious beliefs. But what I've noticed is that the university and employers are ignoring that legal standard and they're implementing their own. Don't give up. Just keep appealing the decision, meet with whoever is responsible for this, tell them that if your religious beliefs aren't going to be upheld like the Constitution and the Alberta Human Rights Act tells us that it should be, threaten them with legal action. Tell them that you'll file a human rights complaint. Tell them you'll file a small claims. You'll take this as far as it needs to go because we feel like we're being discriminated against.
Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Adam Sos here for Rebel News, and I'm now joined by Nathaniel Pawlowski, son of Pastor Artur Pawlowski, who, as you know, was sent to jail for daring to open his church throughout COVID restrictions. We were here just a few weeks ago, and you yourself were part of the protest for students advocating for, among other things, religious exemptions from vaccine mandates. On one front, we do have some good news because you yourself, despite some invasive procedures, obviously managed to attain that. If you can tell us about what the process looked like and how you managed to obtain a religious exemption.
Yeah, so my name is Nathaniel, Artur's son. I'm in my last year of studies here at Mount Royal. My initial religious exemption was denied, and I appealed it, and miraculously it was accepted because from what I've heard of, I was the only one who's been accepted so far. Definitely at least the Christian exemption, I've been the only one. The procedure itself, both the initial exemption procedure and the appeal was very intimate, very invasive and personal. And it's interesting because there's a Supreme Court case called Syndicate Northcrest v. Amsterdam, where the court outlines the test for determining whether a law or a policy is infringement of someone's religious beliefs. The first part of that is establishing whether the person has a genuine nexus with an established religion. But it's a subjective test and you don't have to go into much detail. The second part of that is determining whether the actual law or policy is an infringement of that person's religious beliefs and goes and violates their ability to live in accordance with their beliefs. But what I've noticed is that the university and employers are ignoring that legal standard and they're implementing their own, which leaves a lot of room for problems. My procedure was very invasive. I felt like it violated my privacy. They demanded that in my initial denial, they basically claimed that my beliefs were invalid. So for the appeal process, they made me go into detail of how my beliefs apply in every aspect of my life, going into crazy detail, very personal details. And it's a small indication for how our core values like privacy. Privacy is one of the core values of democracy, especially here in Canada. And it's a small indication for how our values, our core Canadian values, are being superseded by these un-Canadian governance and mandates.
Well, it goes to show that you're studying criminal justice, so that's great. The Anselm case, the interesting thing there is that is functionally, for most, considered to be the precedent-setting case. And one of the conclusions was that a strictly individually held belief that can be affirmed is sufficient for a religious exemption. So we've seen lots of schools saying, for example, for Catholics, well, the bishops don't say that it's automatically a grounds for exemption, or other religious groups saying that vaccination isn't necessarily a violation, but that doesn't, per the precedent of the law, violate your personal convictions. Of the people that you've spoken with on this issue, there was a significant group of people. I think some of you are connected in standing opposed to this. From that group, is there anyone that you've heard of at all who's received successfully a religious exemption other than yourself?
No, so I'm the only person who's received one that I know of, and we are all connected. There's a large group of us here at this university. I've heard of a few students at U of C, but Mount Royal has been denying them all. I was the first person that I've heard of to be accepted.
And what was the process? I know lots of people out there are just feeling deflated. I know people who are deeply bound by their convictions, and that is their reason for not being vaccinated. They've been denied at schools. What did you do? How did you stand up for yourself and secure that religious exemption?
So I had a meeting with the person who's responsible for these exemptions here at the university. I basically went over my denial letter, how I felt that it was wrong that I was denied, that my religious beliefs were essentially spat on. And basically I also said that if I feel like I'm being discriminated, like my religious beliefs are being undermined, I'm going to take legal action. I'm going to file a human rights complaint, and I'm probably going to file a small claims because I have been dealt damages here. So I had a meeting with a person, and he kind of went over what they expect from a religious exemption, but they never told anyone this. There's no like set principle for what they standard. There's no standard that they give. So he kind of outlined what they're looking for. But even then he said it's very difficult to obtain one and this and that. So it was a really strenuous procedure to get it accepted. But it's possible.
And it seems like there is, from many of the stories I've heard, some of them flat out horror stories of people being yelled at and called villains, people we've spoken to, for daring to not want to get vaccinated. There is among administrations, it would seem, and we'll certainly reach out to Mount Royal for commentary, but an ideological support for vaccines and an attempt to undermine any efforts for religious exemption. Would you echo that sentiment?
Yeah, absolutely. Their official stance is that they're not forcing anyone. Of course they're not, but they're coercing us. They're telling us that there's no other options. You have to get it or you don't get to continue your education. But you see with colleges like in Red Deer, they reversed their mandate. Mm-hmm. So now they're going to continue with rapid testing and no student is going to be discriminated against. So I don't see why Mount Royal and University of Calgary and all Albertan universities can't echo what Red Deer College did and do the same thing.
And another question, this is more on the science, I suppose, of the matter, but I've had to be tested to attend some events for the sake of reporting. And the reality of the situation is if a school implements, let's say, testing, we know that people who have the vaccine aren't exempt from spreading. Someone who's been tested frequently, we know they don't have a test and they will not spread. What is the opposition to the far more logical implementation of testing programs that would ensure people's rights aren't violated and they aren't being forced to be vaccinated? Why are people so opposed to that rational alternative?
It's a great question, and they have no answer to that because I posed that same question myself. They say it's expensive, which doesn't make sense because we're paying for our own tests now. Mm-hmm. They're not provided by the university anymore. And it's an automated procedure that replies to our tests. So it scans it, makes sure everything's in order. But to claim that it's too expensive is ridiculous. It's just an excuse. The science behind it, nobody has tested positive that I know of who is part of the rapid testing program right now. So it's obviously a safe alternative, and I don't understand why they're not continuing with it.
And finally, perhaps a word of encouragement for students out there who are in the same situation or maybe have been denied. Any thoughts for those people?
Yeah, don't give up. Just keep appealing the decision. Meet with whoever is responsible for this. Tell them that if your religious beliefs aren't going to be upheld, like the Constitution and the Alberta Human Rights Act tells us that it should be, threaten them with legal action. Mm-hmm. Tell them that you'll file a human rights complaint. Tell them you'll file a small claims. You'll take this as far as it needs to go because we feel like we're being discriminated against.
Well, Nathaniel, thanks for your brave stance. Thanks for sharing this update with us. For students out there who are in the same situation, do not hesitate to reach out to us. FightVaccinePassports.com is the place to go to share your stories. We are waging a number of fights against these discriminatory measures across this country.
We aired some of Nathaniel Pawlowski's concerns with Mount Royal University, who provided the following response. They said that Mount Royal University's position on COVID-19 is contained here, and they provided a link. They said that it outlines how individuals at MRU may apply for an accommodation under protected grounds as enumerated by the Human Rights Act. Mount Royal University did not specifically reply to the concerns aired by Nathaniel Pawlowski, aside from what's provided on their website.
I want to thank you all for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sos. If you agree that students based on their deeply held beliefs should be granted medical exemptions and you think that vaccine passports violate our fundamental rights, help us fight back against vaccine mandates at fightvaccinepassports.com.